into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
Pretty good.
Rolling.
I haven't ever done that one before. It's the opposite of it's finished. Hello. Welcome.
Really good.
Welcome to Pod Damn America, the very hot, it's very hot in here, goth, socialist, cultural critique podcast comedy thing. It's very hot. I don't have, it's hot. That's the intro this week. It's so fucking hot. Anders, tell us about eugenics.
Yeah, welcome to Anders Lee here's Kratom Corner.
If you think it's hot now, you should see the culture around eugenics in the early 20th century.
Oh, it was
That was all the rage. It was that, and
it was lit.
flapper haircuts, and fucking cat. Wait, what is this? Cat urine destroyer.
My roommate just went to great lengths to drop that on the table without
Bothering.
without interrupting the narrative.
Respectfully so.
That was so funny to me.
Have you guys ever?
Can't let it fly that we have access to urine destroyer.
I mean, it is very funny.
No, that's something I need because my bathroom. I don't have any cats, but every time the girlfriend comes over, she says it smells like pee-pee, and I've cleaned everything. I don't know what it is.
What's that? Huh?
But maybe I should use
It
this.
smells like human pee-pee?
She doesn't specify what species.
But you don't have any cats.
What are you going
I
to
don't-
spray this on? It's like poison.
Well,
Maybe
Just
the
spray it
toilet, I don't
everywhere?
know. You know what they sell?
Oh, I
in-
thought it was like Scotch Guard. Like you were just gonna like weatherproof your entire bathroom. That way,
Yeah.
if any piss goes astray, it just bounces all over the place and shit.
Oh,
Well, you
my
know what
house
they-
smells like cancer now. This is much better.
In Minnesota, they sell coyote urine pellets to put in your yard as a way of like
Put in
getting.
your kratom.
Yeah. Well, I actually had a. Well, this is the urine pellets are to like get varmint to go away,
Like
but
coyotes.
like coyotes and shit. But they do. My friend.
They hate their own urine.
Yeah, my friend whose name is also Anders. He was in New York. He went to college in Long Island, and he convinced this guy who was just dosed out all the time. This guy did like acid like every day and stuff. He's like that guy in the dorm, and my buddy Anders was like, "Yeah, in Minnesota we do this thing, moose cum. We drink it, and it makes you fucked up." And this guy was like, "Oh, can you like get me some?"
Does it make you fucked up?
No,
because
he was
you
fucking
feel
with
like
him.
you've had
Yeah,
sex
that's
with a
not
moose?
real, right?
I guess
Dude, I'll just believe anything you say. I trust you so much.
that's the problem.
And that
but-
you would abuse that for your moose cum joke. It's not
Yeah.
funny. It's not cool.
Kratom gives you the strength of a moose. In case you didn't
I know
that.
you're doing it now.
Oh damn!
All right. Well, lie to me some more. Let's explore.
You know what? You know what's a big lie is the idea that we need to breed out undesirable elements of the human race, and that we
Really?
can perfect humans on the basis of their racial composition and or genetic predispositions and qualities.
Man, now you're really fucking with us.
You're telling me that my genetic code will not tell me if I'm predisposed to stealing loaves of bread?
Not so much. I mean, certainly seems like a silly thing to say or think in 2019, although it is certainly making a comeback. But this was par for the course, common sense, logical stuff in the early 20th century for a very long time.
That's
this
not
was
so long ago.
not so long ago, and it lasted for like 60, 40, like 50 to 60 years. Eugenics is what we're talking about today, the big E. I initially got
This episode is entitled "The Big E." By the
Big
way,
E.
move on.
I thought we were doing eugenic. What was it?
Neon Eugenics Evangelion.
Yes.
I need to make a compilation of every time you've called something the big.
It doesn't really work with the big E because E does not really sound like the beginning. It sounds like it begins with a U.
Neon Eugenics Morongelian.
The notorious Biggie.
Big E.
That's what they've been talking about. Eugenics.
Yeah. The big
study
EU.
of
The big huge. There we go. Huge.
Okay. Well,
It was huge back in the day. And it started. Well, the reason I got interested in this, why don't I start with that, is I've been trying to learn a lot about my show, Dummy, about the autistic spectrum, and I happen to believe that the roots of the TISM come from, the diagnosis comes from the eugenic movement, and that's
Big A.
borne out by the history. Eugen, another EU name, Eugen Bleuler was a...
This is an uncle of yours? I met Andrew's uncle last Friday. His name's Rolf.
That's true.
Shit's funny as hell.
Not Ralph, Rolf.
Rolf.
Which is we're good Nordic stock, which is what they wanted, and as it turns out, not so great.
Eugenics is the study of trying to create a world of Anders Lees. That was very popular for millennia.
Now I understand the thesis here.
Yeah, that's what my show's about.
This eugenics can't be real because I'm it, baby.
Yeah,
This is the best it gets.
that's a good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
but Eugen Bleuler was
That sounds like a name like you made up on the spot.
it very well could be, and I thought his name, and it would be perfect because his first name is spelled E-U-G-E-N. So for a while I thought it was just like Eugene or Eugen, which would be like maybe eugenics was named after him, but no, it's the Swiss pronounce it Eugen. But he was a psychiatrist.
Founder of Eugenics.
Yeah, it was his own thing. But he was the founder, not of eugenics, but of schizophrenia, which is a very controversial topic. On the left, unlike the sort of Foucaultian left, schizophrenia is seen as this, is a construct, and in some respects, I think that's true. But originally, he thought autism was just a subset of schizophrenia, because it was like somebody who is just autos is where it came from, someone who's just like inward and can't look outside of themselves.
Now, Anders, you're a doctor. Is there a difference
Yeah.
between paranoid schizophrenia and then other versions of it?
I would think so.
Like, if you have schizophrenia, do you always have multiple personalities?
No.
or-
No.
Schizophrenia isn't like just like it was popularized as the idea of multiple personality disorder, but that's like two different things.
I think of the man
Yeah.
from Psycho, and I think, what version of autism is this? Where you think
That-
your mother is your dog.
Well, I think contemporarily that would be described as a personality disorder of some kind. But, I mean, schizophrenia is a pretty big tree. It's got a lot of branches, and one of them he thought was autism. He, though, was a eugenicist, so
Autism
I think
is
it's...
one of the presents under the schizophrenia tree.
Yeah.
God. Oh no, I love imagining the schizophrenia tree. The various boxes you open that drive you
The
insane.
terrible boxes every year.
No.
I emptied my bank account. This was a horrible present.
You know what might not be a bad present? You get the leaves from the schizophrenia tree, grind them up, cold brew them, drink them up. That'd be
Kratom,
good.
baby.
Kratom.
That's what kratom is. The leaves from the schizophrenia tree.
It makes you just a little bit crazy.
Yeah. But
Do that podcast in Edge.
But Eugen was under the impression that it was important to identify these conditions and things because we must address them, or in his words, our race will rapidly deteriorate. I guess he meant the human race, but so this
It
was
oscillates back and forth between human and
why.
white.
Yeah.
Yeah.
White hours.
White. Yeah.
White people.
Right. So it's, I don't, and of course, I will add the caveat, I think a lot of these conditions are legitimate and things we need to study and help people with, but we need to put it in the context of this is how it was founded. This is what the social context was at the time when he coined, really, he didn't, schizophrenia was, he was a eugenicist, and they were looking for ways, not necessarily to help people, I guess in some respects they were, but the main thrust of what his job was and what most clinical professionals was to purify the human race, purify the germplasm, which is a term they used for human genetic stock and national genetic stock.
They didn't discover DNA till way later.
Yeah.
So you think it starts more with Eugen and
No. I just bring him up as my own entry point into why I got interested in this stuff.
Okay. All right, that makes sense.
But it started with a guy, Sir Francis Galton, who was a jack of all trades, statistician, sociologist, anthropologist, explorer, meteorologist, psychologist, and he
real ass dude.
yeah, he lived in Victorian era England and was the first person to use the term eugenics.
There was only coal under his schizophrenia tree.
Yeah,
which was very useful at the time.
This guy was a real Scrooge. He wrote this book in 1883, Inquiries into Human Faculty and Its Development. And I think a very important point about Sir Francis Galton is that he was a half-cousin with Charles Darwin. And that's where a lot of eugenicists got their sort of intellectual backing from. They'd say, look at this, Origin of the Species, Darwin, the human race needs to, survival of the fittest. That's how evolution happens. We got to get on top of our germplasm. We got to get on the gene code.
You flip the idea, and instead of waiting for people with weak traits to die, just get rid of the people with weak traits to make the race stronger.
Exactly. Accelerate the process.
It's your cousin Francis. I got that sound you've been looking for. And then he just reads eugenics literature into the... I guess there wasn't a telephone at the time.
You can't see it, but it's a germplasm.
It's from Back to the Future. Okay. I'm done.
But Darwin actually had sort of a more nuanced view on this. As some people have argued he was a racist. I'll see that point, sure. But he did think that charity was important. That was actually a big aspect of evolution, is that as humans get more advanced, we become more charitable, more open to helping those who are less fortunate. He saw that as a good thing. So he probably would not have been in support of the eugenics movement and a lot of these policies that ended up happening. But that didn't stop people like Galton from running with this, as well as some other people. Charles Davenport was one who was a zoologist, fitting for this.
You gotta love him.
Yeah, he really viewed people as animals, some of us, and was really sort of a precursor to the Nazis. He actually helped the Nazis formulate some of their policies.
Really?
And yeah, when they were still, before they came to power, at least.
In the 30s or 20s?
In the 20s and 30s, yeah. He would help them out with stuff. They would correspond. He would go over, give them research, and have an exchange. But he actually...
Teach them about animals.
Teach them about animals, yeah.
Trips to the zoo with their zoologist friend.
Keep in mind, Himmler, an elephant never forgets.
I want to see the penguins.
But he actually kind of turned against the Nazis in the late 30s.
Really?
His reasoning, though, was not so great.
It's a deep sleeper agent.
Yeah, he had kind of a pretty hot take. Once he found out that Joseph Goebbels, had a clubfoot, he got kind of upset and wrote a letter.
The spiciest take of all time. The Nazis are not racist enough.
He wrote a letter to the editor in Life magazine, and he's talking about Roosevelt, and he's saying, he's mad at Life, and he says that Life should be guilty of this lower middle class banality printed under the portrait of President Roosevelt, the man who triumphed over blighting physical affliction to become the happy leader of his country, is assured of lasting rank among the heroes of the human spirit. Why not look up history and see how dangerous is the ambitious, mentally well-endowed physical cripple, whether the crippling was congenital or acquired? From Tamerlan, I don't know who that is, to Goebbels, the club-footed, physical cripples, genial, gentle-hearted, charitable men like some other people have led revolutions and inspired to dictatorships while burdening their country with heavy taxes and reducing its finances to chaos.
This is like the first ether.
Yeah. He says the physically defective man tends to compensate for his defect by doing great and striking non-physical things that lead to full satisfaction of his, in other directions, thwarted ambition.
Remember that part in Ether where Nas tells Jay-Z he has AIDS?
No.
That's like what this is.
Yeah, I guess so.
This is obviously relevant today because there's like all this alt-right shit happening that's like neo-eugenics sort of shit.
Yeah.
Didn't even mean to say that or to make that pun, but like, have you seen that that meme that's going around from like men's testosterone at twitter.com or whatever thing about like
That shit's fucked.
Is that real? Is that like that's not a satire image?
I don't know. It might be. It could be one of those things that's like fake that got passed around by people. Like, can you believe this? But assuming it's real, just so the audience knows what we're talking about, there's this like graphic going around on Twitter right now that's supposedly put out by this weird like proud boyish what is the word, like misogynistic
Men's
rightsy
thing.
sort of thing that's like it's got a bunch of, it's got 4 men on it, one's from the 1950s, one's from the 80s, one's from now, and then the one is like in the future, and they get progressively smaller and more effeminate,
And then they
like
start growing tits.
the one in the future, apparently in like 2030 or whatever, men are, according to them, gonna have like tits and like tiny dicks and like wide hips and shit like that.
From gaming. It also has like part of the chart is penis size, and part of it's like strength incredibly high, penis size, bust worthy.
Yeah, they look like
It's the
Pokemon or
1940s.
something, where they've got like stats on them, and there's those little black bars over there.
That's crazy. If this is real, this is an image made by someone who thinks everyone was taller in 1940.
Yeah.
Are you fucking kidding
Oh,
me?
yeah.
Have you not seen an old person?
And there's still huge people walking around now. It makes no sense.
Makes no sense.
But it caused me to get curious about something that I've never actually looked up, which is that like every once in a while somebody will call you like soy face. Let's say you're doing something called soy face online, which is one of their things. And I got curious. I looked it up on Know Your Meme, and I guess what it is there's like a thing where they put 2 pictures next to each other like that, and they're like, real men. And I guess real men, it's just like you don't smile in a photograph. And then apparently a sign of the de-evolution of the male species in America, according to these people, is when you take a photo and your mouth is like open and you're smiling.
Oh, I do that shit all the
What's wrong with
time.
that?
I think
Oh,
it's...
no.
I don't, which is weird. Somebody called me soy face. I'm not a very smiley person. But also, you just look like you're having fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do it because I'm wrinkly. My wrinkles show if I don't open my mouth.
The other thing with soy face is supposed to be that you eat soy because you're like vegan or whatever, you're feminized, and then the soy gives you lady hormones
Supposedly,
Which is
yeah.
like
that
so,
make you smile like a
Which I don't-
dipshit.
I don't think it's true.
Yeah, soy milk is so 2004. Like
I don't
we're
think
on
they'd
the
say
almond
it if it
cashew.
wasn't true.
Well, anyway, I guess what just led me to think about this was someone discovering a photo of Joseph Goebbels doing soy face. In like black and white, going like, no, the revolution is compromised.
Yeah, it's so much soy.
And he's just like,
clubbed up his
yeah,
foot.
just having a good time at the zoo with the other Nazis.
Well, it's interesting because the Nazis actually were not as ableist as these guys. At first, they were. They had a T4 euthanasia program where they would kill disabled people. but there were protests. They actually allowed these protests in Nazi Germany because people, they had friends and neighbors who were disabled, and they're like, hey, we should not kill them, and they're not Jews.
Their families were being murdered, and so there was some pushback there.
Right,
Yeah.
and they actually allowed them to protest, and they changed the policy, which is kind of bizarre. You know, people were able to do that, and they also bizarre because people who were considered autistic psychopaths were killed in many cases.
Yeah.
And they were okay with that.
Well, you know, I mean, I don't want to get too off topic, but you always, if you're a political power structure, you do what you can get away with. And
Yeah.
so if there's an ideology that you want to
Right.
kill these people and do eugenics, you can do it to the Polish people and the religious minorities you've rounded up and the like political prisoners you've rounded up. But then if you're just doing it to people in daycares or whatever,
Yeah.
you're going to get some letters.
Right. Daycare, I mean, I could go off on, this is part of my show, Dummy, the solo show, but
Plug here
Plug.
for Dummy the
little
Solo
plug.
Show. It's a show. It's an Andrew show.
The autistic psychopaths who were identified by Hans Asperger, who worked for the Nazis. They were all, it was a very wide array of people, and basically anybody who just couldn't follow, who for whatever reason, intellectually or just like behaviorally, and their temperament was not right for the Hitler Youth, was considered a psychopath and called autistic and often executed. Sometimes, like, they were cured, but it was basically cut-ups in
Wait,
the
so-
Hitler Youth.
So what makes you a psychopath in the Hitler Youth?
Not being able to join the Boy Scouts. Basically.
Yeah. Like a real psychopath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't want to build a little like tent.
We give him
Right.
so many knots and he can't tie any of them, the lunatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you're just like, fuck this is stupid. Then
Were either of you in Boy
This
Scouts?
kid's out of his fucking mind.
I was in Cub Scouts.
I was in Cub Scouts. I remember they gave me a knife at a very young age to carve up soap. And I looked around while carving up the soap. And then I looked down. And my hands were covered in blood because I'd just been cutting the shit out of my thumb.
Oh,
over
you're
and over
cutting.
again.
You're cutting in.
I just didn't
into
feel
your hand
it
and not
yeah,
cutting away.
yeah. I thought my hand was soap. Anyway, I think I would be killed if I was born in a different time period. That's my point.
I did drugs and broke into cars when I was a kid.
When you were like 10 years old?
Yeah. Did you know I found out this week.
Let's move on.
I went to middle school with Lizzo. Like in the same class.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
somebody showed me her Wikipedia page and said she went to my fucking middle school, and I've been like racking my brain all week trying to figure out like which fucking were we in the same class? Because she wasn't called Lizzo.
Was her
back
name
then.
Lizzo at the time?
No, her name's like Marianne Jefferson or something like that.
Marianne Williamson?
Jefferson.
Marianne
Maybe it was she
Williamson.
like morphed into Lizzo and then
Yeah. She was
I've
this
attained
little
the power
fat
of
black woman.
transformation from the moon.
Why did I never remember that? It seems like such a specific thing to remember.
So another of these guys, one of the head honchos in the Big Huge, was Madison Grant, who was a banker who was related to the Founding Fathers. His roots were in America, and before the eugenics movement, was actually an environmentalist. Like he loved America so much that he would go to the redwood forest and study the flora and fauna and try to stop them from being cut down. Because he loved America.
He's never come across a single redwood that has been feeble-minded.
Yeah.
This tree is not insane.
All of these trees fuck.
But
And then he comes across the schizophrenia tree. The most insane of all trees.
It just looks like the Nightmare Before Christmas tree. It's got like a skull on the side.
It's got the door in it, and he goes inside and goes crazy and invents eugenics. What's this? What's this? Dun, 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 dun. It's just him like fucking causing Nazi shit to happen.
but the tree of America was starting to get a little heavy on the branches in the late 1800s.
Oh, wow.
Nice
The
metaphor.
branches are cracking because a lot of people, there's mass immigration from Europe.
The old country.
Yeah, the old country, a lot of Southern Europeans. It kind of staved off during World War I, but then after the armistice, boom, another swell of people.
A lot of people who need not apply, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, mix.
Use the back door, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Long-haired, freaky people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Hippies.
the song.
Hippies are coming over from Europe.
Right.
That song is very funny from a eugenics perspective because it's just insisting that, like, you know who has it really rough? Long-haired white dudes. In
Wait,
the
what song?
60s. There's this song from, like, the 60s or 70s or something that's, like, it goes like, sign, sign, everywhere a sign, yada, 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 everywhere a
It's
sign.
a song about signs telling you what to do.
And it's like every time you walk into a place of employment, there's a sign that says long-haired, freaky people need not apply or whatever. And it's the most bullshit, made-up oppression song of all time. It's like some white guy in the 80s or
It
whatever.
really resonates with everyone, though, because you hear it and you're like, yeah, signs are bullshit. Don't tell me what to do.
The first part that's just about signs, very fun. And you're
very
like,
vague,
wait
yeah.
a minute, dude, I'm pretty sure you can get a job.
That makes me question the authenticity of the Jimmy John's. They have a sign that says hippies use the back door.
Yeah.
It looks like it's like from the 60s or something, but maybe they just...
You don't think every one of those Jimmy John's was open since the 60s, you're saying? You don't think those are authentic signs?
You think all
I don't know.
of the signs at Jimmy John's are 100% literal. You can smell everyone.
Well, that's kind of their brand is like stoner sandwiches, you know.
Boy, howdy, are we going to get into it in a future episode?
Yes.
Okay.
Their brand is sandwiches that suck.
I fucking hate that place.
Fuck you, Jimmy John's.
Suck
the
my dick.
eugenics episode, bitch.
Jimmy, yeah.
We're going to tie up your fallopian tubes, Jimmy John's. Fuck you.
So Madison Grant has all this happening, and sees all this happening. It's very upsetting to him because he works on Wall Street. He walks outside. There's all these riffraff, as they were called at the time. All these people from Italy and Poland and all these some Germans who were sort of assimilated by that point, but you know. Europeans, people from other places who
Anyone
didn't
who
appreciate.
wasn't a white Protestant in this particular moment.
Yeah. Anybody who did not appreciate the fact that his ancestors signed the Declaration of Independence, he thought was a problem. And so he gets turned on to this literature from Davenport and Galton, the other ones, and starts lobbying Congress and writes his own book, Passing of the Great Race, in 1916. And he sort of invents this idea of the Nordic, quote-unquote, race, which he thinks is the most highly evolved race, the most superior race, but it's a very fragile race.
Oh, no.
The germplasm is very tender. It's still getting its bearings.
It's so good that you can't touch it.
Exactly. It's like scallops or something.
It's like scallops.
Yeah.
That good germ plasm.
Yeah. And it could be knocked out of whack if you get some of these dirty masses coming over from Europe and polluting the germplasm. He thought that lesser races would overwhelm the genetics and if people procreate from different races.
It's always really fun to read into social Darwinism and eugenics and get into what was, an official academic paper at any of these time periods, because a lot of it is written the same way as BuzzFeed articles are written now, where it's like, your top 10 races for nasty nymphos. 1, Slovenians. 2, Jewish Slovenians. It's just like you have a laundry list of just like people you don't like and you put them in order.
Yeah.
Well,
and you're reading it, and you're like, I don't think you actually put that much work into this article. It's just a list.
It seems like you made all of this up.
These are mostly gifts.
But I do respect your right to unionize. You should do it. Eugenic scientists, unionize.
The Roma people. GIF of Hermione nodding.
But that was really a thing. In 1921, they hold a eugenics convention where they have all these findings, and they have, stuff showing that, as they called them, Negroes had smaller skulls. Italians were likely to engage in criminality. That was a genetic thing that you would be a born criminal. And
This is the first Comic Con. There's like people cosplaying and shit.
you have a booth for each race.
People just dressed up as Italian Spider-Man. He shoots spaghetti.
You can meet Eugen.
You meet Eugen, but he turns out he's like a fake feminist.
He's not a real eugenicist.
We
He's
saw
like-
that letter you wrote to your wife, Eugen. It's bullshit.
But this was, I mean, criminality was a very big thing, and it was always, there were findings. There was this family, I think they were called the Dugdales from New Jersey, and it was
the DuckTales.
Dugdales. Woo!
And there was a sociologist who studied them and showed that for generations they had all been crooks. And his point, the original sociologist, was, this is because of environmental factors. They just teach each successive generation how to lie, cheat, and steal. And
a thing that makes sense.
Right.
Instead of this other witchcraft theory.
yeah, and the eugenicists seized on this, and they ignored all the environmental social stuff, and they're just like, see, we got a criminality gene. It's the Dugdales. They're born crooks, natural born killers.
I do think it'd be so funny to be from the family that everyone thinks is like notorious criminals, or not even like it's not like you're from the Capones. You're just like, it's the Four Loko family. They can't do anything right. They're always throwing shovels of shit at each other.
But one of the weirdest ones to me was all the anti-Semitic tropes, because they're all very contradictory. Because at the time, and this was in the eugenics convention, they were saying that Jews are dumb, like they're an unintelligent race,
Hey now.
and they can't procreate with us, which kind of goes against the stereotype we have about Jews now. And it's also like. And in
the one that's true.
well, it's I've known some dumb Jews. I've known some smart Jews.
Well, that's like
That's a Bob Dylan song.
that's
How many tropes must a Jew walk down?
that's like a feature of every sort of shitty eugenicist like argument, though. Like, for instance, or just every like right wing fucking fash bullshit. Like, for instance, a big one this week, not to date this evergreen episode, but, like, there's more Antifa shit going on, and, like, Antifa to the right is always somehow simultaneously a bunch of pussies and an existential threat.
They're ninjas that you think are pussies.
Yeah. It has to be one or the other, but somehow when you just, this specific style of, like, alienating and othering in the way that, the Nazis did to the Jews is, like, somehow they're both like weak and also, they're coming to get you.
Right. They control the banking system and they're keeping the whites poor, but they're also communists, which was a big stereotype at this time, that the Bolsheviks was a Jewish thing because Trotsky was a Jew.
I feel like if the right is more immersed in the Naruto universe than you give them credit for, they could have a very specific opinion of what Antifa is, which is just untrained, foolish nins who go around. They're not properly trained in killing techniques.
Is that a reference from Naruto?
Yes, right. They're Genin level or below.
I don't think
They don't know how to use their powers.
neither of us understood that. But someone that listens to this show,
Somebody's going wild right now.
dude, somebody came to a show I was doing the other night, and they had a dog with them, and somebody on the show was like, "What's the dog's name?" And the guy was like, "Naruto." He like pronounced it correctly.
Some guy messaged me to do a Paul Bearer impression on this show, and I don't know what he sounds like.
Like a pallbearer, like at a funeral?
The wrestler Paul Bearer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
that's a clever name.
official sorry from the podcast.
I'm Paul Bear.
I'm Paul Bearer.
I'm pallbearer.
I'm carrying your coffin. Oh, fuck.
Yeah, he sounds like the teenager from The Simpsons.
Oh, I can't stop coming. My thing is I can't stop coming when I touch the dead.
It's a weird gimmick, but I didn't make it up.
Oh, this riff is 3 minutes late, but Jews everywhere, a Jew. Being smart and also kind of dumb.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Take it away, Andrew.
That was the national anthem for a while. in the 20s. So this is mostly an intellectual movement at the late 1800s, early 1900s. But then in 1924, it becomes codified into law. Calvin Coolidge signs the Restriction Act in 1924, which drastically reduces immigration from Europe, like by I think something like 70 or 80%. Just like a lot of people were coming over and contributing to the economy, contributing to society, assimilating in some ways, bringing their own culture and making America a melting pot in others. But that kind of came to an end in 1924, and it didn't get really opened up again until like the 60s. So you have during this time a lot of people trying to come to America for various reasons, many of them of the Jewish persuasion or ethnicity, trying to come and, escape some things that were happening in Europe
Maybe
that were kind of
escaping
unpleasant.
something.
Yeah. One of
Not to be
them.
named.
Yeah. One of them.
The big escape room at the time, Europe. If you think about a concentration camp,
That's the most insensitive way to frame a concentration camp.
Germany's hottest new escape room.
But one of them. Well, speaking of escape rooms, one of the people who tried to get here and wrote letters to the government was one Otto Frank, who was not able to come to America, and was the father of one Anne Frank, who
Friend of the show. Body's going through a lot of changes.
Yeah, and as somebody pointed out in this documentary I watched, the Nazis are, I guess, directly responsible for the death of the Frank family, but so is the U.S. Congress, and so is Calvin Coolidge for not having a heart and letting people escape people who want to
Sure.
systematically murder them.
So, is the immigration policies changing part of the Monroe Doctrine? Is that just
Monroe
made official policy? Independent America, living outside of Europe's wars, and then the big push for that under Truman. The same kind of spirit that makes the United Nations originally, or the League of Nations.
Well, there may have been an isolationist bent to this, but it was between the wars.
What year was it?
1924. So this was it was pretty much just like a nativist.
So it's not Truman then. Never mind.
No, that was a bit later.
I was sort of listening. Forget what I said.
But
did we ever lay out what eugenics means in terms of public policy? And
yeah, that's what I'm getting to now.
Okay.
So there's the Immigration Restriction Act, and then there's a whole suite of laws that are some passed, some not passed throughout. It was kind of difficult to get this done, but there was an effort to have forced sterilization laws for people who were quote-unquote feeble-minded. And feeble-minded was a pretty broad spectrum, but they had the diagnostic sort of spectrum was based on what age you were mentally, according to the government.
This was my favorite part of the PBS documentary
it's
we watched.
it's the.
Do you have those classifications up?
I do. I memorized them. So the worst thing you could be, or the lowest level, is idiot, which meant you were age 3 and below mentally. Next, we got imbecile, which meant you were 3 to 7, and then 7 to 12 is moron. But that's actually, moron is the one they were most concerned about because they can kind of blend in with the general population.
We've all seen
Sneaky
these morons. You see these morons at the Jimmy John's.
But for some reason,
You had to take one of the Nazis' BuzzFeed quiz to find out whether you're an imbecile or a moron.
yeah. Well, this is what I kind of want to get a kill, fuck, marry going with
No one's ever said in that order.
with idiot, imbecile, moron. Which of
Part
your
of all
friends do you think would qualify as what? I feel like I'm not in the middle. I'm either an idiot or a moron.
I think you're a moron, Anders.
I don't
Okay.
think you're 3 years or younger intellectually.
I drool. I drool on stuff accidentally a lot.
Yeah, you just walk really well. I don't know.
That's just because you got the soy mouth.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you got
maybe
soy
that's
mouth. I'm obsessed with the idea of a doctor coming in and using terms like we all know that like doctors used to say retarded recently, but now they don't. But just like back then, you would get a child diagnosed, and the doctor would come and be like, "I'm sorry, your child has shit for brains."
Yeah, but that's what this was.
He's a real dumb fuck.
But what's weird to me and is the fact that 12 was the cutoff. So what if somebody stuck at age 13? You know, like that's kind of more dangerous than a lot of these other
That goes back to age
ages.
of consent laws at the time. Good to go.
I don't know. I think somebody who's
Just
like
an adult that's just like constantly using a tech deck and shit. Like, using soaps to try to grind on things.
but so a Supreme
The only one with a razor scooter.
So one of the laws was passed in Virginia, my home state originally, where
Shout out.
it was hard to get this going because Virginia just didn't, the South at the time, just didn't have a big scientific community. Like most colleges in the South just didn't even have science departments.
It was mostly beer pong related studies.
Yeah. But they were like very concerned about, I mean, obviously the South is not unfriendly to like miscegenation laws and all kinds of racist laws and stuff. But actually a lot of the eugenicists were concerned about Southern whites for being like feeble-minded. So they wanted to get this thing passed. And
That's ironic.
yeah. But like low-income people, which is a lot of what this is, as you know, we're talking about a minute ago. During the Great War, World War I, they all the people who were conscripted because there was a draft that were given these tests, and they would ask them shit like, you know, where is the chimney supposed to go? They would show you a diagram of a house and like, where's the chimney supposed to go, or what's missing. They would have a house and there was a chimney missing, and like there's a guy from Sicily who drew a cross in place of the chimney.
Italians think the cross is a chimney.
Right, because I don't think they have
see.
chimneys in Sicily. It's kind of hot
morons.
there. They don't really need that.
It's a boot full of morons. There's a snake in my boot.
Right. So it's very subjective questions, and this is like the origination of the modern IQ test is like eugenics, and this idea that, you know, you can be kind of scaled, like intelligence is this vertical plane where you can kind of rate people along.
Have any of you taken an IQ test?
I don't think so. I may have I'm sure I did as a little kid. Yeah.
One time,
was very high.
one time I got into this verbal altercation with Joe Biden, and we were forced to do IQ tests against each other as a form of dueling.
I wonder what 1920s Joe Biden's position would be on.
Oh, he's a moron.
Well, I was gonna say on eugenics. Like, how would he try to square that circle of like he runs for office in 1950s after being pro-eugenics.
We know he's against them using buses of any kind.
Yeah. She gets bussy.
But so one of the people that was subject to this law was a woman named what's her fucking name? Buck was her last name. Carrie
What's
Buck.
your fucking name?
Carrie Buck, not Pearl Buck,
You.
who was an author. Who I got her mixed up when I was doing this. But Carrie Buck, who's the subject of a book that I would recommend called Imbeciles by Adam Cohen, which goes into her Supreme Court case. It's a very sad story. She was a low-income woman who was put in the foster care system, and the nephew of her foster parents raped her, and she got pregnant. And then they went before the court and said that she was not mentally equipped to raise the baby, and they adopted her child. And then she was sterilized because they said she was feeble-minded, and there's a state law at the time that said you could do that, and so they made it so she couldn't have kids. She was actually not really that dumb. She was a normal person. She had average grades in school, and went before the Supreme Court. She challenged it the state first and went all the way up to the Supreme Court, saying like I should be allowed to raise kids. You can't, and you shouldn't just make a law that says people can't reproduce. That's fucked up.
I know I'm not saying a lot here, but I am frowning. Pretty
Yeah, I don't
strongly.
really have any good jokes on this one.
Yeah,
it's very sad.
It's a sad story, but their logic was stupid. Maybe we can
In your
goof
face,
on this.
bitch.
Maybe we can punch up here. The logic they used for calling her feeble-minded, because she was a normal aptitude, was that and this was the case with a lot of women, is that she fucked a lot. And which I don't know if that was actually
You'd
true.
have to
That's
be
the argument.
feeble-minded.
Yeah.
Be fucking around this much.
Right. Promiscuity was a criteria for being feeble-minded if you're a woman. I don't actually know. I don't think they...
Giving away all that brain.
Ah, there it
Until
is.
you don't got any anymore.
That's what it is. God damn.
I suspect Carrie Buck was of an average sexual appetite as well, but they, portrayed her as being a promiscuous woman in court. And
Yo, if fucking a lot makes you stupid, then I'm fucking boo.
Any person with a private Instagram now would be sterilized.
So her case goes to the Supreme Court, and the judge, Oliver Wendell Holmes, gives a ruling and rules in favor of the state of Virginia that they can sterilize her because, in his words, 3 generations of imbeciles is enough.
God damn it! Just sounds so. It sounds so bad.
It's mean. It's just mean. And they would do this.
It also
a lot.
sounds like the tagline for like
Like a comedy,
Yeah,
like a Three Stooges style situation. Was the point of the Three Stooges that they should not be allowed to breed? Was that like the
Maybe.
takeaway? Which is like, if they breed, our rakes will just be flying into their heads for the rest of our generations.
It may have been eugenic propaganda.
I was thinking about doing an entire episode on this, but the premise of the movie Idiocracy is, in my opinion, just eugenicist.
Yes.
At
Oh,
the
yeah.
beginning of the movie, it's just like this thing where this wealthy couple is like, we decided not to breed because we're smarter than poor people, and then like some people in a trailer like, yeah, we had all these fucking kids, and then that's it, and it just goes
That's
from
it.
there, and you're like,
You
what
get
the fuck did you just say? You know?
You
Yeah.
get to the Gatorade scene we all love.
There are a lot of people today who will kind of say that seriously. They'll say like, I think you should have to pass an IQ test before you reproduce.
Yeah, well, it's a perfect fucking note to this episode, because this line of thought never went away. Like, I think
Yeah.
we like to think of it as like, oh, we threw it out and it's the thing of the past or whatever. But like with, the sort of relation it has to Darwinism, and then
Yeah.
from there to like, like the whole like social Darwinist thing and the free
Right.
market and all this shit. A lot of people that consider themselves, fucking silenced, intellectual, shitty Bill Hicks guys or whatever, really buy into that. Like, yeah, you should have to pass an IQ test to vote and all this stuff.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely
We've-
programmed into the culture just historically. So, like, we beat the Nazis, who are, very pro-eugenics, but that doesn't mean the American media was against it at all. I was having a conversation with my mom, and my brother was there last summer, and we were saying something about a mentally retarded couple who lived across the street, and they got married, and she was like, that's nice, they shouldn't breed. And we had to stop the conversation, because this is our mom, and we like her, and she's very smart, she's a doctor, but we were like, yeah, it's really fucked up you said that.
I mean, yeah, we understand now, like it's the accepted that you can't do this on the basis of race or ethnicity, but intelligence, social status, like that's still fair game to these people. Like they haven't connected the dots on that. I think if you don't think people should procreate, you should be monitored and tested, and maybe got your stuff snipped.
New rules.
New rule, yeah. And that
You're
was
the
big thing.
one who gets a test. How about that? That's the rule.
Double eugenics.
The big E.
A big E.
Huge. So I mean, this is something that would happen is that like they wouldn't even tell people that they were sterilizing them. You would just wake up one day and they'd be like, "Yeah, your friend said you're a moron, a middle grade moron," as Carrie Buck was titled, and she just like went in. And a lot of times they would just go in for some other unrelated procedure and ended up getting sterilized. Her sister got sterilized too. And by the 70s, 60,000 Americans had been sterilized.
Yikes.
Yeah, and as recently as 2015, it was still, I believe, on the books in Virginia, and there had to pay out compensation for people who had been sterilized back in the day.
How much money is that worth? Is it like it's like worth?
Well, maybe
the cost of you having a child?
Yeah,
is that the idea?
They would probably, if it was a Republican governor, they would probably make the argument that the state saved you money.
The state saved you money? Yeah, that's the real victim blaming thing.
I mean, it is also funny because, like, obviously I believe people should do whatever they want with their bodies, but it is just kind of ironic that, like, now there are people who pay to get this done.
Yeah.
You know?
Seriously, expect us to swallow that tripe?
Now, as a special treat courtesy of our friends at the Meat Council, please help yourselves to this tripe.
Damn it, there's the wrong clip. I was trying to find this clip from The Simpsons where they're all the kids are like, "I'm a grade A moron."
I do love tripe.
Yeah.
I just the fact you could go in to get your wisdom teeth pulled and then just wake up with no balls.
Well, so that's something that happened to
I know you jaywalk, you bitch.
to a woman named Ann Cooper Hewitt, who this was a big scandal back in the day. She was an heiress whose mom got her sterilized because she was going to inherit all this money if she had a kid. So if Ann Cooper Hewitt had a child, her father's will was contingent on her having a child. She would inherit all his money. Her mom saw to it that she was sterilized because she wanted that money, and so she went to the state and she said, "My daughter is feeble-minded." I think she was a middle grade imbecile, something like that, because again, she did a lot of fucking.
There's some shit in my daughter's brains.
Yeah, but this revealed a contradiction in the law because when they took it to court, the argument was not about procreation; it was about her capacity to raise a child. It was their argument was her lifestyle wouldn't be conducive to her raising a child, which was not the point of the law. The law was to preserve the germplasm.
Right. It's for our race, sir.
Yeah.
It's not what this is about. It's about racial purity, something we can all get behind.
But this was a huge trend in the 1920s. This was on really everybody's mind. They had
several Walt Disney rides based around this concept.
They had couples. There was a little bit of I saw about this. There were couples they would interview who were worried that they were both really tall, and so they're like, "I don't know if our kids are going to be too tall. Is that bad for the nation's stock?" And it was in many ways a sort of. There were a lot of progressives who were behind this, and part of it was because this was just the dominant trend. So some people had to kind of become acquiesced to it. So Margaret Sanger is an example. We talked a little bit about this with Melly Macker a couple weeks ago, but she ended up having to embrace eugenics because, as you might assume, women controlling their own birth control was not a big popular idea in the early 20th century. That was kind of a new idea that had a lot of stigma.
The compromise was your local priest has the birth control, and you can get it from him
if you're Italian.
If you're Italian. If you're Protestant, you can go to a chimney, and there the birth control's in your chimney.
Right.
Santa Claus gives it to you.
Under the schizophrenia tree.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like a Faustian bargain she made, and then W.E.B. Du Bois actually said was pro-eugenics. And because his big thing was, the advancement of colored people. And so he thought, and I,
words.
I'm a Du Bois stan for the most part, but on this, he thought that the Negro had to get their act together and produce better ones.
His words.
Yeah.
Not Anders' words.
Not my words. No, that's what he thought. Is that and I don't know what was in his head, but this was sort of how big neoliberalism has been, and it's infected every aspect of everything over the past 20, 30 years. This was the case for eugenics back in the early 20th century. It was very hard to push back against because it was just so many people of different political persuasions just were convinced to think that way.
Politically, yes, but also you have to recognize that it's really easy for us to say it's stupid now because we live in the future and we know about DNA and it's factually proven to be witchcraft, It's not based in reality. But at the time, this is what all the people in lab coats were doing. So, of course, that's what you would back up.
And some of them...
I would also reiterate that, we think we're, so separate from this, but so many of people's worldview still molds to this just in a more, cleaned up, censored way.
Yeah.
In a nice, polite way. People still buy into, all the... all the social Darwinist theory, and then they're just but let's not take it to that extreme or whatever.
Right. And it's interesting because a lot of the rhetoric they would use was sort of...
Criminals should fuck once. That's the compliment.
Some of the arguments they would use were sort of what we would call today progressive left-wing arguments. They had a eugenics creed that Charles Davenport...
the worst Assassin's Creed title.
He came up with that said, "I believe in striving to raise the human race to the highest plane of social organization, of cooperative work, and of effective endeavor." Ain't nothing wrong with that in and of itself.
Good creed.
Yeah, they were in many ways utopian. I'm on record. A lot of leftists disagree with this. I'm pro-utopianism. I think we got to think about a perfect society. But what we don't have to think about is perfect people. We're not gonna do that. We're not gonna perfect people. And the science at the time was starting to figure this out in terms of heredity, which was one of the things that they based their argument on. Was these defects, these traits are hereditary. And that's why we have to breed it out of people. There was a scientist who was doing experiments on flies, and he was trying to get mutations going.
Mendel?
Might have been him. He was an American guy, but he.
Never mind.
He
I'm just here to help.
He was doing it by breeding.
It's Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah. He was doing it by breed. That is the perfect human. That's what they were striving for, was a Goldblum.
Yeah.
They thought you could turn enough fruit flies into Jeff Goldblum. That was the popular belief at the time.
Life finds a way.
Yeah. But he was doing experiments and trying to get mutations happening, and he was doing that by breeding, and he was getting impatient because it was taking a really, really long time to happen. And then he just one night was like, "Why don't I just try something with radiation?" So he did some radiation shit on the flies, and it started mutating them, changing their DNA.
Just writing down a journal? Yeah, you can fuck up a lot of flies this way.
Right. But that revelation was kind of that genes, I guess they didn't know about DNA at that point, but genes were very malleable. The human genes are very malleable. They're subject to external factors. There's hereditary shit, but it's not etched in stone. And that people at the time thought, the Nazis thought, because a lot of these policies that were passed in the U.S., like I said, there was a pipeline between the eugenicists in America and the Nazis, but we didn't go so far as to say we should execute these people and kill them en masse. And when we found out that was happening in the 40s, that was kind of a setback for the eugenics movement.
It was like a Bill Maher's new rule, but for us being against killing eugenics people,
Yeah.
It was like a Bill Maher's new rule.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like a Bill Maher's new rule, but against eugenics people.
always
New
works
rule.
twice.
Like one of my new rules, but for eugenics people.
Joke always works better when you just say it again.
Maybe I haven't been clear here. Eugenics people? They've got to go.
Eugenics people.
People!
But yeah, so after the Holocaust, people see these camps, and it becomes a lot harder to argue that we need to, and the science isn't there anymore. It's the movement took a downward spiral. Obviously, racism, institutional racism, didn't go away
Because of that setback, the Holocaust.
Yeah. But today, we see a lot of these same arguments popping up, and some of them are still racial. Charles Murray. I mean, we should actually think about doing a deep dive on The Bell Curve, that fucking book that he wrote in the 90s, which was basically making these same arguments, is
Yeah,
that
more like
there are
bullshit.
Yeah.
intractable parts of different races, and that we need to figure that into public policy somehow.
One thing we've been talking about is how like these people are so foolish because they didn't have the wisdom of DNA and genetic mutation and stuff like that. But if you look at like Charles Murray and like a lot of the neo eugenics, the whatever the fuck, I'm like not finding the word here, but the fucking alt-right bullshit. It's all evolutionary psychologists, who just sort of updated the same like method
Right.
and same theory to like genetic thinking and stuff like that.
Right.
New patch.
Yeah.
And
New character.
there are still liberal scientists
McGinnis.
today who will say stuff like, we need to, if we're going to have a serious, if we're going to take on the alt-right, we need to we need to cede the point that race is made up. We need to say that there's something real there. They're trying to meet them halfway. And so they try to find these differences, these like genetic things in different ethnicities and races. But if you look at it, it's just everybody started in the same place, and it's just a hodgepodge. Like there's Australians who have things in common with people from. I don't have all the details in front
If
of
you
me,
want
but
to talk about a race bred to be criminals, I mean,
The Australian race.
I mean, honestly,
Australian race.
that
Yeah.
disproves the whole eugenics
I've been
argument
listening to a lot
because
of documentaries.
it started as a penal colony, and then they changed the social situation in Australia, and it's no longer. I mean, if eugenics was a real thing, then Australia would still be just a bunch of it would be like Mad Max, I guess. I mean,
Be like
that's
the
what they're going
Irish of
for.
the Pacific.
It would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Yeah, but science for the people. If you want a more cogent explanation of what I'm trying to say now, look up that, because they had this guy who's going into the race science and showing how it is really a social thing, and there are external factors that environmental factors that impact DNA. But it is not intractable. It's not this. It doesn't exist. Race is not real. And anyone who tries to make it, you got to look at their motives, because usually they ain't great. And we see that today with Charles Murray now being rehabilitated by Sam Harris, who is saying that he's this awfully mistreated intellectual, Charles Murray, and that he got into this debate with Ezra Klein. This is about a year ago. I think we talked about it, but his point was I'm an Ashkenazi Jew. What if they had a finding? What if there's data that showed that Ashkenazi Jews are more likely to be selfish? Why can't we just accept that as data? And it's like, well, first of all, that's a hypothetical thing. Second of all, how do you come up with that conclusion? How do you divorce that from social factors? How do you divorce that from reality in the world? And also from the fucking conclusions that this type of research always ends up in, which is, at best, snipping people's junk, at worst, Buchenwald and Auschwitz.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting, man. I mean, in, fucking psychology 101 sort of shit, the first couple of years of undergrad psych, if you take all that shit, one of the first things, at least, 10 years ago when I was in college, that they had already gotten to and already tried to beat way into everyone's brain to kind of keep, I think, this line of thinking from happening, is that, there were two theories on just the psychology as a scientific interpretation of these heady philosophical questions and, why we are the way we are or whatever. One approach was nature and the other approach was nurture, right? And so all these eugenicist arguments are nature. They're foolishly deterministic in terms of thinking like, you can find a gene that makes you this or that, these abstract qualities. Andrew Yang tweeted recently that he thinks that there's just a Republican gene and a Democrat gene. That's dumb as fuck. And
There
then
are liberals who think that. Jonathan Haidt is that's his big thing.
well, it's also like, so what I was getting at is that, there's also an approach to this that looks at everything as, you're just entirely a product of your environment. And then if you sort of look into the science of that, that's also,
Right.
probably really foolish. And so
Also an important point. Yep.
What the smart way of looking at this is, as a scientist going into the future, is it seems like it's some sort of interplay between the two things that can't be easily quantifiable in any way, right?
Yeah.
So like they did like twin studies to sort of flesh this out, and they found that like things that you would think that would be argued to be innate genetically, like at the time, like homosexuality, like they thought was like a predetermined, genetic thing, or at least a lot of people did. Well, they do these twin studies, over the last like 50 years or whatever, where what they would do is they'd take like babies that were orphaned or whatever, but they were twins, and then raise them in like separate parts of the world, into entirely different environments, and then do case studies on them over their entire lives, check in with them and go, how's it going? And then track what things they had in common and what things they didn't. The idea being, if these two people that are, one of them's fucking raised in China and the other one's in Oklahoma, and they're twins, and they both are, fucking blonde, then you can go, well, there's probably a genetic basis for being blonde, right? But if they're both like have personality traits, like these things that the eugenicists are arguing about, being lazy or whatever, if they don't both have those things in common, then you can look and go, this disproves probably the theory that there's this genetic basis for being, whatever, like a more abstract personality trait. All this stuff is mega complicated, but the idea behind the studies, I think, was to point out that, like, this is not that simple, and so to implement any of these, social, like, mechanisms to control this sort of stuff is extremely foolish and dangerous and playing God,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is an important point, too, on the other side of it, that, like, we are not tabula rasas. People have their own blank slates. It's, I think, a Greek word.
So wise.
We have our own innate wisdom or impulses and personalities and things, but it's not hinged so deterministically to our ethnicity, to our fucking genetics. I mean, it is, but it's not a racial thing so much.
Right.
And it's also we also can't. It's hard to separate it from the social factors as well.
Like, I'm Italian, but I only commit crimes out of true love of the game.
Gone back to my old self. The other thing
You're
is
Italian?
I'm a quarter
fuck.
Italian.
Did not know.
But
that.
I'm only an eighth impassioned to do crimes.
the other thing about it is, like, from a socialist perspective, from a utopian perspective, even if you could hypothetically someday isolate these things to be predetermined, who cares? What does that mean?
Yeah.
Is society about putting together everything in a way that makes it more advantageous for some people for some reason?
Yeah. I would love
Well,
to.
you could get rid of a lot of diseases if you could actually, like, do genetic programming and stuff. Maybe that could be another episode that's like the flip side of this one.
Let's do a flip side of this episode.
Yeah, flip side.
Where we're Nazis.
Well, it's funny too. The political science, which is sort of the liberal end of this, was originally a racist science. It was about slicing up demographics and figuring out how to just get one over on people of color, basically. And to this day, Jonathan Haidt is somebody who his big thing is trying to figure out the personalities and the different psychological traits and backgrounds in Democrats and Republicans, as if these are the also fixed things.
This is so fucking dumb. Because there's two types of people.
Right.
Is this different than Jonathan Chait? Is this a different person?
These equally shitty. Jonathan
I didn't know if you were
Haidt.
just doing like a funny Andersism on the guy I already know about.
Wait, what's this guy's name?
It's spelled Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt.
Haidt. Yeah.
Evil Jonathan Chait.
It's when Jonathan Chait wrestles. He's Jonathan.
Oh.
Damn, Anders. You've been teaching me, man.
Kratom Corner, baby.
Are we...
That's the Kratom Corner. Hey, everyone. Thanks
Yeah.
for coming out.
Thanks for
Give it
coming
up
out.
one more time for Jake's apartment.
Thanks
Give
for-
it up for
Yeah.
everyone you've seen tonight.
Thanks for coming out.
Tip your bartenders.
Thanks to Max Ogle on the couch over there.
Drive safe.
He's got headphones on. He's respectful.
There's a cat here now.
Yeah, are we going to do plugs or anything?
Yeah, fuck it. Denver, Colfax Comedy Festival, week of July 14th, that weekend. I'll be over the place. I have a flyer I made with some art. Someone tweeted at me. It's on my website and my Twitter that's got my tour dates on it. And also come to Yoko in Bushwick on Tuesday, which is July 2nd.
Nice.
That's it.
Okay, I'm Alex Patak. If this is your first episode, hello. Follow me on Twitter at Patak Jokes. That's PTAK Jokes. I'll put all my stuff up there. And every Sunday, I have a show in Brooklyn called Bad News. It's a comedy show at Cherry Tree Bar at 7. Come out and see me. I'm so alone. That's it.
I am doing my show about a lot of this subject matter in sort of a humorous light.
It's a Nazi-based show.
Yes, it's about how I am the superior Ubermensch.
The show just
and
Andrews takes his shirt off and then he just poses.
The flaw in eugenics was that it was not trying to find the Andersley, and that's what you.
The key is the Andersley.
You can find out. I do have a show coming up in New York, weekend after next, I believe. And you can find out about it if you like on Facebook dummy-solo show. You will not find out about it is if you just view the page. And I get a notification when you view it, and then you don't like it. There's no point in doing that because you're
That's
not going to get the
rude.
goods. You're not going to
hurting
find the
Anders'
dates.
feelings.
Yeah. Don't tease me like that.
I've
Damn
liked
fam.
the page.
Thank you for liking the page. More people should like it. Dummy-solo show. We got dates coming up. And if you're in the UK, I'm going to be in Edinburgh all of August. So please come out to that.
The ultimate man in August.
It's finished?
It's finished.
Mr. McClure, I have a crazy friend who says it's wrong to eat meat. Is he crazy?
No, just ignorant. You see, your crazy friend never heard of the food chain. Just ask this scientician. He'll tell you that in nature, one creature invariably eats another to survive. Don't kid yourself, Jimmy. If a cow ever got the chance, he'd eat you and everyone you care about.
Wow, Mr. McClure, I was a grade A moron to ever question eating meat.
Yes, you were, Jimmy. Yes, you were.
You're hurting me.